Okay, I am going to call this meeting to order. My name is Gene Gend. I'm the Executive Director of Calvary Lutheran Church and School. That's a volunteer elected position. I'm ending my second two-year term, and I am term limited, so one of the things we'll be doing today is electing my successor. Appreciate you attending and sticking around a little bit longer for our congregational meeting. This will take less than 1 hour. I'd like to begin with just a short devotion, and this is from the book of Habakkuk. And he was one of the minor prophets who lived in approximately 612 BC, and he had bad news and good news. The bad news is that Israel was going to suffer at the hands of the Chaldeans, and there'd be great gnashing of teeth and persecution. But the good news was that a Redeemer would eventually come on God's time. So good news, bad news. There's bad news yet. We know that our Redeemer is coming. So today's congregational meeting is going to be almost all good news. I wanted to share that with you. So just going to read one verse from Habakkuk. This is chapter 3, verse 18. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Amen. Thank you. This is the third year that we've actually done a Saturday night session. And we've done that to include the people on Saturday night who are probably not going to want to come back on a Sunday. We had 39 in attendance last night, which was a good showing. And so they were all able to hear where we've been and where we're going, which is important. We have a constitution and bylaws that requires that we have an annual meeting where we approve a budget, we elect officers and ministry teams, we share information, and we do any other business that's necessary. Who can vote at today's meeting? Any members who are 18 or older. And a quorum for our congregational meetings is 5% of our membership. This isn't Chicago, so you only get to vote once. Okay. So this resumes the meeting that was recessed yesterday. Next slide, please. So, woohoo! Only 2.5 years. Can you believe it? I'd really like to give great thanks to the sign committee, to the people who had to twist some arms in local government, to a member of our congregation and a pastor who went door to door to get neighbors to sign a petition that said they would accept an electronic sign in the neighborhood and wouldn't protest it. We did have a public hearing. Appreciate people who attended from Calvary to help push that through. It's a beautiful thing. A year ago at this time, well, actually 2 years ago, the sign was fully funded. We knew what we wanted. The pandemic shut everything down. You couldn't even submit variances. But a year ago, we knew we had the design in hand. We knew we wanted electronic versus letterboard. We started our variance process, which ultimately got approved. We could not actually, it would be foolish to have ordered the sign until we knew that we had that variance in our hands. So it all came together, and praise the Lord for that. Next slide, please. So some of the highs and lows, we are almost back to normal. The last of our major events to be canceled was our fall bazaar from last fall. We've celebrated our 90th anniversary 1 year late. On our big events that we share with our congregation and the community are back: our yard sale, our facility work days, egg hunt. No Lunch and Learn became Lunch and Learn again. Our video ministry continues to grow. We're recording services, and the pandemic really prompted us to dive into that with both feet and get that going. And one of the unexpected advantages to come out of the pandemic is we started doing virtual meetings, sometimes hybrid meetings, which was virtual and in person. And we actually got better participation for some of those meetings because people who were traveling or were working late could just hop onto their computer and actually be part of that. So that was very helpful. We give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. We take the things that he gives. On the right-hand side, The CARES Act of 2020 and an updated act in 2021 made a lot of money available to small businesses. We aggressively applied for and obtained all the money that we were entitled to. We also obtained EANS funds, Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools. Our principal is going to talk a little bit about how that has been spent and what we're doing with that money. That was money the government gave to the states, and then the states decided how they were going to allocate it to various school districts. So more highs than lows. Inflation isn't affecting us. Anybody who's buying anything knows prices are going up, energy costs are going up, and things are often delayed. So it's frustrating to those who try to maintain this campus in a beautiful state that when we order things, they're frequently delayed. You know, I think we advertised the new sign being installed about 3 times before they actually got the last computer board that allowed it to be installed. So a lot of positive things here. Next slide, please. One of the things we did with our unexpected revenue, our pandemic money, was we completely reshingled all of the roofs on this campus. That happened 1 week in December. We had unbelievably warm, dry weather. This company attacked this with about 25 workers. They were on multiple buildings at the same time. That's just one of the things that has happened. We're sort of starting from the top and trying to work down as we make things better here. Next slide, please. Upper left-hand corner, the University of Indianapolis has a day of service, and every year they send about 30 students here for us to use however we can best utilize them. It was actually canceled the last 2 years, but it returned again this past September. We had them spreading mulch and pulling weeds in the playground. So they come on a bus, 30 kids come out, three hours later the bus comes back and picks them up. Takes a little bit of planning, but that's a blessing. And we try to be green in what we do, and as we're replacing incandescent lights in the classrooms with LED bulbs, we stack all those up, we save them, and we take them to a recycling event. And you see the sanctuary AC unit, which is on the roof. I think it's working now, but it's been a little warm in here, and there was just, again, one piece missing for weeks before that could get installed. Next slide, please. Okay, we painted the sanctuary. On the upper left, you see, if you came in here in February, you saw this monster lift, and so we painted all of the white walls. We also, a couple times a year, do our light bulb replacement, which in the sanctuary and the gym requires a lift and sometimes removing pews to get to the lights. So we appreciate everybody who has helped us on our facility work days, and just know that keeping all the lights on is a lot different than at home when you just change out a light bulb. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things we're going to do is approve the minutes from the previous meeting. There was a paper copy for you to pick up. It's really yesterday's news, sort of gives you a glimpse back where we're coming from. At the last year's meeting, we approved the minutes from the previous meeting. We elected the slate of officers. We approved 2 changes to the bylaws. One was to extend ministry team directors from 1 3-year term to 2 3-year terms. When we present the slate, you're going to see that really had a major impact because several of the directors are agreeing to serve a second 3-year term. And then we also approved the budget. The second bylaw change we made is we have a Calvary Lutheran Church endowment fund, approximately slightly north of $800,000 right now. We take out 5% per year to spend on things that the Constitution allows us to spend it on, which is typically launching something new. So when we launched a deaconess, when we created a new position of director of advancement, that lets us fund that initially to 100%, and then it declines in the future years. We also can use our endowment fund to donate money to LCMS, to the Synod, to Lutheran High School. And one of the things that the Constitution called out was the ability to donate it to the Lutheran Multicultural Mission of Indianapolis. Well, that no longer exists. So we removed that wording from the Constitution and replaced it with a very generic statement that said we can now fund a nonprofit organization or association which has been approved by the congregation. No plans on doing anything with that yet, but we've given ourselves a lot of flexibility. If we wanted to give money to some worthy cause for some special reasons, we would be able to do that. And we approve the budget. Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Can I second? Does anybody have any questions or comments? Thank you. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Next up is the election of officers and ministry teams. This was one of the handouts you had. And first of all, I'd like to thank the nominating committee of Pastor Ebert, Deaconess Emily Speldy, Kara Hyatt, our Director of Engagement, Susan Rickert, Wade Jackson, and Jennifer Skojak, our Director of Admissions and Development. I also want to thank all those willing to serve again. One of the fine points here is we don't reelect everybody every year. This is a little bit like the U.S. Senate, where we elect 1/3 of the officers and team leaders each year. So this year we're actually electing the ministry team leads in the left-hand column, and all 3 of them have agreed to serve a second term. And I think that's really going to give us some more continuity and be able to move those ministry teams just a little bit further, because the feedback we got when we discussed whether we wanted to make that constitutional change was, just as I'm understanding what my job is, I have to leave. And so now, just as they're understanding what their job is, they're really going to be able to lean all in and make things happen. So the chair will entertain a motion to elect the slate as presented. Yes. Would my parliamentarian like to tell me how to proceed?
What was the question, Jake?
The question was, the motion was made yesterday, so does it need to be made in a different manner?
Bill and I were just discussing that. Probably since this is a reset resumption of the meeting, even though you had a motion, it would probably be safer just to have a new motion.
So Bill Lout suggests that we just have a new motion. So moved. Second? Second. Any questions or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Next up, Pastor Ebert with his congregational update.
Said each year at our congregational meeting, that one thing that we are asked to go ahead and bring you an update upon is to just bring you an update regarding the congregational membership, is that you see those numbers totaling right there, as that our congregational membership as of May 31st, 2022, registers at 1,052 confirmed or communicant members, as well as then we have 1,270 baptized members is what is on the books. That is the numbers that are brought there, but the main thing that I want to focus on is I want to focus on a little bit of where we're at and where we're going. So before I head into there, is there any questions on the numbers here that you see before you? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to our ministry year theme, and where is it that we are heading in the year ahead? As that you've probably noticed in the last couple of weeks, the last 2 times that I've preached, I've asked that question. Why are we here as Calvary Lutheran Church and School? That was 3 weeks ago. That last week I asked the question of where are we going? And so we've been asking that question and thinking a little bit more about what is God's unique calling to us as a church, and where is it that he is leading us out in that mission. And so I want to at least stop and just reflect upon that, or at least challenge you to think a little bit deeper in respect to what is it that we are called to be as the church. That there's this whole idea that how do we compare or how do we relate with this? As I've heard it well put, is that Tim Mackey of the Bible Project put this out there in respect to, is the church more like a group of grapes, or is it more like a bag of marbles? Now, that's not like a lost your marbles joke, just to let you know. No, but what is it that we as the church, what is it that we are? See, the fact is that there's a difference between a congregation, one that is indeed joined together, and simply a conglomeration or an aggregation or whatever you want to call it, is that there's this whole idea that when you look at grapes, that sure enough, yes, they all look the same, they have a commonality, but when you begin to pull them apart and look below the surface, what is there? That they are all connected. That the very health and well-being, the very growth, all depends upon the fact that these very separate things are joined and united and connected, and that the health and well-being of one part has an effect on the rest, right? That you don't go ahead and just say, oh, that one grape has started to go a little rotten, we'll just leave it there, it's not a big deal. What's going to happen is it's going to start having that effect on others. Is that a bag of marbles can very easily spring a hole, and then one or two or more may slowly slip away without much of a notice. But the fact is that we are more than that. We are a group that is connected in Christ, and we are joined together, taking our strength from the same source, joined together as that same people. And so in this year ahead, we want to be thinking about that idea of at least growing together. Are we connected in that very gift that Christ has given us? And so throughout this year is that we want to be thinking, as we are growing together, what is our goal? What is our focus? That why are we here? See, I asked those questions the last two sermons, but when I read the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 9, I feel like he is asking us another question, one that leads us deeper. Is that Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 19, that though I am free from all, that I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew. To those under the law I became as one under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law. Is that to those that are weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. That I have become all things to all people, that by all possible means I might save some. And how does Paul end that reading? That he ends it with this very verse right here, that I do all for the sake of the gospel. That I do all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessing. And so the question that we want to ask this year is, why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we here doing this thing that we call Calvary Lutheran Church? Is that Paul asked that question because what he at least puts out there before us is that why does he do it? He doesn't do it to build himself up. He doesn't look at the numbers. He doesn't look at all of those things. He doesn't look at himself and say, look at all that I've done and accomplished. No, what does he do? That he says, look at those who for their sake have now come to share in those very same blessings. And so this year we are going to be talking about for the sake of others. Not for the sake of us, not for the sake of me, not for the sake of you, but for the sake of others, for the sake of the gospel. That how are we sharing those blessings with others? And so we're going to be asking ourselves three kind of central questions as a part of that. That what are we doing to welcome the guest? The person who has no idea of that connection within Calvary Lutheran Church or has that opportunity to come through our doors for whatever it is, a yard sale, a holiday bazaar, an Easter egg hunt, whatever it might be. When they walk through these doors, do they know and understand and feel welcomed? Or do they look at us and say, what's a narthex? Do they look at us and they say, why do you do that? Do they look at our services and say, oh, I'm confused and I'm lost? That how do we at least think about the guest and say, how are we welcoming them well? I think the last number that I had, I think we had like over, was it over 300 people, 300 kids at the Easter egg hunt and 300 adults, something like that? 300 kids, over 300 kids. That even just a few families came back the next morning. Would we have been able or been prepared to welcome them if they had no church background? That's a question that we want to ask. The next question that we want to ask is that what are we doing to challenge the connected? How are we challenging ourselves to step out of our comfort zone, to do things that maybe are new or different or something that we are called to grow? I don't know if you know this about Jesus. He has that like to get us out of our comfort zone. If you don't believe me, read the Bible. The disciples were constantly out of their comfort zone, and they were constantly being challenged. And so what do I mean by challenging the connected? That this isn't a church or a school thing. This isn't a member or a non-member thing. Is that if you are connected to Calvary Lutheran Church and School, we are going to be wanting to ask that question of where is God challenging you to step out into that next opportunity for you to learn and grow. And the final thing that we're going to ask is we're going to ask, how are we serving our community? That how are we in our neighborhood and how is our neighborhood directly being impacted by what we are doing here? What are we known for? And what do people see us for? And what do people look at and say, man, if they weren't here, who would provide that? And so we're going to be asking those questions both as leaders as well as congregation members. We'll be asking that question in meetings, in our sermons, in our Bible studies. We're going to be thinking about how are we living for the sake of others. And so you might be asking, why does that matter? Why does that matter? I don't know. Does it have something to do with the fact that in the last 30 plus years, that the U.S. population has grown some 24%, but our denomination has decreased by the same amount? Does it have something to do with the fact that church attendance in North America is down 40% since before COVID? That's not a Calvary thing. That's a North America thing. That there are fewer people attending, as well as those that are attending fewer times. Is that within the last month, in North America, at least as I understand it, 1,700 clergy left the ministry. Within the last month, 50% of all ministers contemplated not just moving to a different church, but leaving the ministry. We are at a point in history that it is important that we ask ourselves, why are we here? If we are here only for us, then there is that very darkness at work. That we are here for the sake of others, and that is what God has called us for. And so we are thinking about that idea, about how do we live in this way. That if we are about growing and transforming, and if we are about meeting and caring for others, the fact is that's going to, in some ways, that's going to bring that fact that we are going to need to step out in different ways that are uncomfortable for us. Is that I love this comic, is that it's just fantastic. We're hoping that you can lead us on a journey of transformation without requiring any real changes. I mean, that sounds kind of good. I would love a diet that I could get skinnier and not change what I eat. I would love an exercise program that I could get stronger, that I don't have to do anything more of labor that I already am doing right now. But the fact is that anything that is about growth and transformation requires change. It requires opportunities for us to step out in new ways. Now, don't hear that as like a scary thing. Don't hear that as a threat. Yeah, that's that opportunity. Where is God calling us to take new steps and new opportunities to meet people in new ways? That's a blessing. And so I hope this year that you are excited to join me with that very opportunity as we ask that question. For the sake of others, how are we welcoming the guest? How are we challenging the connected? And indeed, how are we serving our community? And so with that final announcement is that we do celebrate that growth together, and we do that all for the sake of others. That two other announcements that I'd like to make before I hand it on over to others. First off is that if you are curious about this, or if somehow you had missed this along the way, is that Pastor Sam Trammell has received a call that he is currently still considering to another congregation, is that he is still in the process of deliberating on that call, that he has not reached a decision yet on that, but he will be in the coming weeks. But please continue to pray for him as he deliberates on that call. The second thing that I would go ahead and bring out is that, that in the midst of things is that, this is Gene Jen's last voters meeting with the congregation. Gene has been on the executive committee practically since I came here. I think that was 1 year before he was on there, and he's been a part of that. And he has faithfully served the congregation as executive director for the past 4 years, as assistant executive director for 4 years before that, is that if you would please join me as we show our appreciation for his leadership and all that he has done. Is that if you ever want to come back and lead a voters meeting, I'm sure that everybody is always just like fighting over that responsibility. But Gene, we do thank you so much for your service and for all that you're doing. And so with that being said, does anybody have any questions about anything I talked about or any other ministry-related items for me? All right. So that is, I think, heading over to our...
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you for those kind words. It's easy when you've got a strong staff, a strong lay leadership, good teams, so it's a total team effort. Next up is going to be an update on the school from our principal, Steve Renstner. Steve is coming on up, and we need the microphone back. Oh, Andrew's got it.
Good morning. I should say good afternoon. As we look back on the timeline from 2020, we all know what occurred in March of 2020. It was a very tumultuous year in terms of the teaching of children and their helps. Studies have shown that during that time period, being isolated at home, having to learn virtually, has caused problems in their social emotional learning as well as academics. So the federal government came out with EANS funds, emergency assistance for non-public schools, which were given to the state of Indiana, and then Indiana elected how to handle that. EANS 1 monies were issued last summer. Calvary received $225,000 of that money. First thought I had was, wow, how can we spend all this? This is going to be tough. Well, it wasn't tough at all. It evaporated quite quickly. We still have about $50,000 of that money's left, which we can use through 2023, August of 23. We will edit that, amend it, and continue to use it. What did those funds go for? Primarily, those monies went for inventory items. We were able to purchase 90 Chromebooks. We were able to purchase 6 Promethean active panels. Those are the whiteboards on the wall of the classrooms where the teachers interact with the computers, touch and go. Very, very nice. We were able to do so much of the infrastructure. EANS 2 monies came out, and the monies are based on, in part, your socio-economic numbers. EANS 2 was much more related in that regard, the underserved. we received $260,000 Ian's 2. That money had to be budgeted and sent in by March. Again, how do you spend that? It was easy. This time, the money is going towards staffing, towards programming, towards curriculum for the kids, direct input. We were able to set the foundation first with Ian's 1 money, and then we're able to dream what kind of programs and the like would that bring. For instance, part of the Ian's 2 money is we are looking to employ a STEM instructor. We can use those funds. A curriculum coach. So the monies are going not only for the students and helping them address their learning needs, but also to help the faculty and help them grow with professional development. So it's kind of like those ideas you might have had in your home. You want to paint, you want new carpet, you want a roof, whatever. You have to plan for it and budget. Ian's 1 was able to give us those funds to get the ball rolling. Ian's 2 was to put those into practice. So we're very, very pleased to have that. Very, very thankful for our teaching staff. They worked tremendously over the past 2-3 years during this time period to provide for the education of the kids virtually, in person, you name it, all the different protocols and precautionary measures that we had. It was a joy this past spring to gather in the Lord's house free again without restriction. We had our 24 8th graders graduate the 72nd year of Calvary Lutheran Church and School with full participation. So again, I'm very pleased for that. Any questions for me? Yes?
Steve, can you just speak briefly to what we do in terms of school security?
Very good. Each year I attend a school safety specialist academy. The faculty and I meet then with pastors and we go through the different areas that we could look at, protocols, safety measures. Just this past spring, facilities working with the teaching staff too changed all the door locks on the classrooms so that the doors can be locked from the inside. Prior, you would have to go outside with your key into the hallway and lock the door. Now the teachers can do that inside. The very good support that we have here at Calvary too with facilities, with the safety. We have a silent alarm button underneath the school secretary's desk that if there was ever an issue, we can press that and notify the first responders to come. We practice our drills. We practice all the different safety measures. And of course, we pray and ask the Lord to continue to grant a hedge of protection and safety around us and all that enter, that we would be safe in His care. Any other questions?
Thank you, Steve. Next up, we're going to hear from our director of the fellowship team, Diane Robinson.
Hello. How are y'all? Are you awake? Are you out there? Good afternoon, as he said. I just wanted to touch base with you all about our fellowship ministry team, your fellowship ministry team, and some of the things we do and how we do them, and how you can be a part of them in a lot of different ways, actually. So our group's mission is to share God's love through our fellowship events. Well, that sounds like what we do here at Calvary, right? We want to share God's love. We share that through those events, which include celebrations with food and having fun and worshiping together too. So, and our group also does help out some of the other ministry teams too with their events. So it's not that we're the authors of all the events we do, but we do help out with quite a few. I was wondering if you could name any of the events you know that happen here that fellowship is connected with. Easter egg hunt we helped with. Fall cookout. And games and fun. The picnic, very, very awesome of you to notice that. And we're happy to do those things. So here's, that was a way of participating, just letting us know that, you do know about some of the things that we do here. Also, how do we do those events? We use a lot of teamwork as all of you do. That's what ministry teams are about, right? So we talk about the events, and we just, we organize them, and then we start asking, right? Who wants to grill some hot dogs, right? Who wants to get the bags ready and, the hot dog buns and roll them up? Who wants to put ketchup in every bag, right? Just the most simplest of things. Who's willing to make some chili for the fall cookout? Oh, okay, I can get 2 pounds of ground beef, and I can get that going, right? Things like that. Who can come in early and help, kind of organize the space, right? Maybe that's setting up chairs and tables. Maybe that's just a few tables. Maybe it's a tent. I'm bringing these things up because I want you to think about the events we do, and I want you to think about how are those events a good thing in light of what Pastor has, is bringing up in terms of, how do we welcome new people into our church? Well, having fun events is a great way to bring somebody. It's more relaxed and it's casual and it's just fun, and maybe they'll have kids, and maybe they'll connect with some of the school kids who are there playing, and then you sit down to have your hot dog, and then maybe there's someone there to just start a conversation with. So there are great opportunities there. And then how do we challenge the connected? How do we challenge ourselves? Have you been participating? Have you been putting those events on the calendar? Have you been attending? So I do encourage you, as you see these events come up, to put them on your calendar and hold on to them. We would love to see you them and invite others to come as well. Watch the bulletin, the newsletter, of course. There's always announcements for little things that are needed here and there, and we greatly appreciate your support, of course. And finally, I just wanted to make a note that when you look at the ministry team list, it looks like we have a pretty good-sized team, and we do, but we can always use a few more. We really can, because every year, there's always a transition. There's a few people who will be leaving, hopefully a few more people coming on board, and then just a note there, just the size of the team doesn't necessarily show you who shows up at each event. Sometimes it's half our team at one event, half our team at the other event. So, and that's because we're all busy people. We all have full calendars. So we would love to have a few more people to help, take on the organization of these amazing events. So thank you for listening. Thank you for blessing us for being here today. Are there any questions about the fellowship team and what they do and how you could be a part of it? Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. I'm just going to speak just a little bit more. So before we get into the financial reports, I just wanted to give a brief update on the new position we created, Director of Advancement, Jennifer Skojak. She couldn't be here today to share some of her accomplishments. But just to remind you, so Jennifer had been a half-time worker, Director of Admissions, which is basically getting kids into school, and we have now exceeded enrollment what it was pre-pandemic, so she continues to excel at that. And in her advancement role, she was able to devote time to advancement. Basically means development, basically means asking people for money. But in terms of the Cross One Rock ride that we had, she was able to spend the time getting additional sponsors, such that we set a new track record in terms of the amount of money that we generated. And last fall, we identified the largest need we ever had for Lutheran SGO, scholarship granting organization scholarships, and we were able to hit that number. And what that means is that and SGO scholarships are a starter track that then enables students to take advantage of an Indiana Choice Scholarship. And what that means is 90% of our students, their tuition will ultimately be paid for by the state of Indiana. Indiana is one of the most pro-school choice states in the USA. The money follows the student. The money doesn't follow the school. So we just thank Jennifer for all the work that she did for admissions and advancement. Okay, next up, our treasurer, Andrew Brock, is going to give our financial report and then present the budget for next year.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for letting me speak on the financials. I've been very excited as I finished my first year of treasurer this year, and the fact that the story of the financials has continued to be strength and sustainability. And, in a world where we've been going through a pandemic, That is not a story that every not-for-profit out there can tell. I'm a CPA, and as part of that, I audit mostly all not-for-profits, and many of these have not had the same story of strength and sustainability that we're going to be able to tell today. So getting started here in the financials, we've made them larger for those of you who can't see them as well as me. My glasses aren't quite strong enough, but so these financials are as of the third quarter ending April 30th, 2022, compared to the same time frame for the past year. So whenever I say fiscal year financials, they're fiscal year to date for the 9-month periods ending both years. So getting started here with these financials, my job's really easy when we're above budget on income and below budget on expense. That's another positive and good year. Looking at our year-to-date revenues so far through April 30th, we are ahead of where we were last year as well, and above budget by $68,000, as I indicated. Expenses were $1.9 million as of the end of April 30th, and again, we had planned for those expenses because we're below that. And if you compare that to last year was about $1.8 million, and the reason that is down is, as we've talked, is the pandemic really stalled a lot of what we were doing. So we knew that we're going to be more expenses this year. We planned for them, and as you can see, we're below that budget. Going down here, our general fund here started the year at $922,000. We have some extraordinary reconciling items here. We're going to cover those in more detail in a few more slides. And then we ended our general fund as of April 30th as of $913,000. So another positive year. Some of that decrease we're going to cover. You're like, well, you just said we had a good positive income, yet our general fund went down. You're going to see why here in a second. It all relates to that extraordinary fund revenue. Any questions so far on any of that? Okay. Well, also if you wanted to see what our revenue was made up of, we do kind of break that down for you. So what contributions were, matching gifts, school gifts, tuition and fees, and other revenue. If you're looking at other revenue number and thinking that's a little bit larger than in previous years, we received about $40,000 in property insurance proceeds for a piece of property that was damaged during a lightning storm this year. So that is covered in that line item. Any questions on any of that so far? Okay, well, moving on to the next slide, you'll see, if you're curious, where have we been funding our missions and how that's been looking per quarter, we went ahead and put that together for you. I'm not going to go into too much detail on it, but you can see per quarter we've funded missions with $55,000, $40,000, and $54,000 respectively each quarter. So going on to the next slide, again, very excited to say we continue to have no debt. If you're looking at last year and saying, well, we do show some debt last year, that's that PPP loan that we took out, and that's part of the extraordinary fund revenue. You're going to see that's going to be a big theme of what we're going to talk about here soon. So that's what that amount is, but we've continued to have no debt. And again, traveling over the pandemic time, this has not been the story that many other not-for-profits have been able to tell. So really blessed that we've continued to stay in this situation here at Calvary. And then moving on to the endowments. So you can kind of see what our endowment balances are of each of our funds. So the current year, our endowments total about $1.15 million. Last year, as of April 30th, they were $1.17 million. So part of the reason for the very small decrease this year is we did disperse out $48,000, which we expect disbursements to happen each year. But for anyone who's been paying attention to the market, the 21 market and the very end of 20 markets were a little more generous than what 2022 has been so far. So that's kind of made some of those balances decrease just a little bit from unrealized losses. But any questions on the endowments? Okay, well, now we're going to move into the extraordinary revenue slides. We wanted to put both of these out here for clear transparency because at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic, the CARES Act had made available a PPP loan, a payroll protection program loan, and some ERC credits, employee retention credits. And we had no idea what this pandemic was going to happen to us. I mean, there was so much uncertainty that we decided to go ahead and take advantage of both of those opportunities. In fact, we even were able to take that money and then just set aside because we really didn't know what was going to happen. We had no idea if we were going to need to pull on it, and really what happened is we didn't need it. Our congregation responded very well to the pandemic, allowed us to keep progressing as we would hope, and so this became an unplanned blessing for us. And so what we've done with that is we did a very intentional effort with the executive committee and the parish council to really allocate these PPP loan at ERC into 4 different categories. That would be a ministry allocation of $77,000, facility improvement of $364. Short term, there were some very immediate needs we had for some facility improvements that just weren't able to make the budget. And so we were able to address those right away because of this unplanned gift here. And then facility improvements, we then put $206,000 into a long-term portion of that for some planned long-term facility improvements that we have that may take a little additional funding as well, but we at least have a nice seed start for those. And then we were able to also go ahead and start a strategic reserve fund with $21,000. You never know what's going to come next. You never know what's unplanned. So this is at least a start of what can be a rainy day policy for us. And as such, with that, we also adopted a liquidity fund, which defined what our liquidity management is, how we're going to pay expenses with liquidity, and how we're also going to, over time, continue to make sure our liquidity and our strategic reserves mirror a strong position for us. And then we are tracking these allocations to very specific funds that we've created internally to make sure that we are using them exactly how we said we were going to use them. So any questions on what the money is and how it was allocated so far? Okay. Well, on the next slide, you'll then see to date through April 30th how we've spent that money. So far through outreach, we were able to spend just over $20,000 to Luhai, Japan, Kenya missionaries, and a few others. We were able to help support Jen Skoziak with the Development Director Program by allocating her $10,000 to get her role up and running. Contemporary service consultant, we put $30,000 there. Employee COVID compensation, we recognize that our employees, they had to work so hard during this pandemic, had to do so many things above and beyond what their role is as defined. And so we wanted to recognize them for their efforts, and we gave them an extra compensation of $44,000 in the aggregate, spread among all the employees. And then we also had facility improvements, where you can see we've had a long list of things that needed done, and we were able to do a lot of that, and that accumulates about $231,000. So of the $696,000 extraordinary revenue, we've have dispersed about $309,000 to date, and we have a plan for the rest of it so far, just haven't spent it yet. So any questions on any of that so far? Yes?
What are we contributing to the Synod's mission program?
To the Synod's mission program? That's an excellent question. I'm gonna need to talk to Gary Boer about that to make sure I get that exact number for you. I know that that's been in a discussion, but I don't have that number off the top of my head. But I will get that for you, and we'll make sure you get an answer on that. Excellent question, though. Sorry I don't have an answer right now for you on that.
That I can say at least that our contribution towards Synod has not truly changed. It's been a consistent amount over the past number of years. So I don't know if you're asking specific numbers or just where we're at, is that we have been continuing along what has been our normal traditional contributions to the Synod.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Well, that covers the financials so far through the year. Now we can go ahead and get moved on to the budget, which I believe is also included in your packets, a larger version of that. To kind of get you into a frame of mind of what you're looking at here, you'll see there's several columns. So the first column is what we actually spent in fiscal year 21. So not this year, last year, 2021 fiscal year. And then what our budget was for this fiscal year, 21-22. And then you can see that third column there is where we estimate we will end. So I keep talking about fiscal years. Our fiscal year ends July 31st, so August 1 through 7/31 is a full year for us. And so this is where we, this is, I think, updated through May and then projected out for the next couple of months to get us to the end of the fiscal year. And then this column over here to the far right that says 22-23 proposed, that's what we're proposing as our budget for next year. So as you're taking a look at this, kind of talk you through, first of all, I want to thank every single person who was involved in this process. This is a very labor-intensive and intentional process, but we want to make sure that we get the numbers right. We want to make sure we're very intentional about how we're spending our money, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything exactly how we say we're going to do it. So if you look at contributions here, you'll see that we've proposed that we've increased them from last year's budget of $1.324 million to $1.372 million. That's a stretch goal for us. But we are of the belief that if we don't set a stretch goal, we're only going to achieve what we set the goal to be. So we're going to push ourselves to achieve that stretch goal there. Tuition and fees, last year was a $1 million budget for that, and this year it's a $1.34 million budget. Main reason for that increase is member sibling discount has been discontinued. Also, this will be offset by various scholarships from the Indiana Choice, SGO, and Schwark Endowment, as we've discussed. And then other revenue, so if you look at that and you say, well, we're projected to end this year at 115, and yet we've decreased our budget down to 86,000. Remember, about 40,000 of property insurance was collected. That's not going to be a recurring thing, hopefully. So that's what the reason that is 86,000 versus where we project to end this year. And then as you go down to the expenses, we definitely had to capture inflation in our expenses this year. As many of you know, there are many costs that we can't avoid where the cost of them are just rising, so we had to capture that. So if you were going to look at the supplies, maintenance, and utility lines, you're going to see that they're up a little bit from where last year's budget was. We're just trying to capture inflation there and what we expect things to start costing us. The other significant category here are salaries and benefits. We have a whole slide dedicated to kind of how we establish that, but overall, there'll be higher minimum pay levels to better compensate hourly personnel, and our average overall pay increase was approximately 4%. And then also, we added a full-time music director to support both the church and school. So any questions on any of those expense numbers or revenue numbers as we've talked about? Okay, well, then that comes down to we are budgeting a surplus of $63,000. That's kind of what we are considering a little bit of padding, though, for that stretch goal on contributions. So you can see that if we don't quite reach our entire stretch goal, we do have $63,000 there, budgeted surplus to kind of make up for that. And then also looking down here, you're going to see that in the 21-22 estimate column, and this is also done in a graph here on the next slide, but this also explains a little bit on that general fund decrease, because when all that extraordinary revenue came in, it went into the general fund, and then as we intentionally placed it to different areas, we've moved it out of the general fund into those other funds that I talked about that we're tracking it in. So that's really just an internal transfer out, and you'll see that here graphically here in a minute. So moving on to the next slide. Yes, this is the graphical slide I was talking about, because when I first look at this slide, you see that, well, I'll kind of give some context. The purple here, or the darker purple, is that's where the general fund change for the year is, and then the lighter purple is the cumulative balance. And so if you're looking at last year's, you say, wow, we jumped up quite a bit, and then, hey, it all went down this year. That's the transfer of that extraordinary revenue. Like I said, it went into the general fund and came back out. What I think the most important thing to see is that if you compare that to 2 years ago, the 19-20 actual, and then the 21-22 estimate of where the general fund's going to end, you'll see that we're continuing to increase that general fund balance, which is very important, especially in times like we've been through. Not everyone has had that, ability to do that. So again, speaks volumes of the engagement and how well the congregation responds to the needs of the church. Any questions on that graph? Okay. Well, the last slide here, I told you we'd talk a little about salaries and benefits and how we get to that. So in the past, we've used the LCMS Indiana District scale to kind of determine what our salaries and benefits were. That was discontinued in 2021, though. So what we started using is the Concordia Plan Services Compensation Decision Support Tool, and then we based our salaries on 100% of the midpoint of that tool. So that's where those got determined from. Okay, well, any questions as I end out here? All right, well, thank you all for the opportunity to present.
Just go ahead and stay. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the congregational budget as discussed. Second. I do have an answer regarding our funding of Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and District. So it's actually a line item under the stewardship budget, and we are funding them to the tune of $10,000 a year. So that answers that question. Any other discussion, questions on the budget? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion has carried. Okay, next slide. Paving the Way special appeal ends this month. Again, as Andrew was describing, we started this $60,000 appeal, and we've achieved a lot of that to stretch our extraordinary revenue. Two of the items that we specifically mentioned was a new dishwasher for the school cafeteria, and that was actually installed in the last 2 weeks and is operational, and it's a beautiful thing. And the parking lot is going to be, south parking lot, repaved this week. My title is executive director, but really there's a slash that says complaint department / suggestion department. So people have always said, you know, Gene, the carpet in here is getting pretty old. Is there any thought to replacing that? Or all the lights in the sanctuary are incandescent bulbs. What if we replaced them with LEDs? Wouldn't we save energy and make them more controllable and they'd last longer? And you know, our restrooms could really use a refresh. They're not Americans with Disability Act compliant. So these are a number of the items that we've been discussing, that we've actually been requesting firm quotes on, so we can understand what would these things cost and prioritize and continue to use the money that we've been blessed with appropriately. Okay, next slide. Does anybody have any other business or any other questions? And the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting following our closing prayer.
So moved.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. And why don't we all stand as we think about for the sake of others, and let's all just read verse 23 together. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. Amen. Thank you.